Welcome to this week's edition of Chatting the Pictures. I'm Cara Finnegan.
And I'm Michael Shaw. This week, we are looking at 3 photos from Hong Kong.
There was so much visual action as a result of the Hong Kong protests recently, and it's really interesting to think about the different kinds of photos that came out of that event. Why don't we dive on in to our segment that we call the news? Here, we're interested in the question of how news photos tell a story.
There have been massive protests since March 31st to protest a bill allowing for Hong Kong residents to be extradited to China. The protests have continued to escalate, and in this latest round last week, an astonishing 2 million out of the 7 million citizens in Hong Kong participated. This first photograph is by Vincent Yu from the Associated Press, and it shows a protester clenching his fist, as hundreds of thousands of people march.
Wow, if any single photograph could encapsulate the nature of public protest, it would be this photograph, wouldn't it? It's this perfect combination of the power of one person, right? That sense of one person can make a difference with the power of thousands of people gathered together. And this photo, just does that so nicely and quickly. You really catch it immediately when you see this picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a photograph when a photographers are dispatched to cover something like this, and certainly something of this magnitude. You want a picture that conveys scale. So you have that, and then you have a whole other level in terms of the fist. We shall not be, ruled. And it also makes for a really powerful focal point. But what's interesting, though, to me, is that it makes it also look like this is an audience, and perhaps like this, someone's on a stage. And this is nothing of the sort. It's really a complete populist uprising.
To me, the fact that that raised fist, which itself, let's talk about that as a really potent symbol of political solidarity that translates across geographical spaces and cultures and time, that fist is out of focus. So the photographer has chosen to at once photograph the fist,
right,
but in a way that keeps the focus on that very, very large mass of people. And to me, that's one of the signals that, this really is a photo about the people.
Yeah, and in fact, what you have is a juxtaposition, because the symbol from a democracy movement, if you can call it that, in Hong Kong, is the umbrella. So if you just look right to the left of the kind of the middle of the arm or forearm, you see that red umbrella. So you have like that juxtaposition. And in the dialogue between those two objects, you really understand how this really is, an anti-authoritarian photograph more than anything else.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm thinking, too, of some of the other images from the protest where people were using umbrellas to both protect themselves from the rain and also to protect themselves from the effects of tear gas and water being circulated to them. Let's move on to our next photo from the Hong Kong protests, and this is a segment we call The Look. And here we're really interested in identifying photos that are compelling for the way that they push the visual boundaries.
This was taken by Isaac Lawrence for AFP Getty. This particular shot was taken outside the Legislative Council complex. It's like the main administration building. What I find amazing about this is a great example of how much news photography has kind of moved into a more artistic sphere. This is truly artful, theatrical, and it's also extraordinarily complex. You could really, on one level, break down the action into like 7 different stories here.
One of the stories of this photo is this contrast between what I would use, it sounds maybe extreme to say, but the kind of beatific facial expression, the looking up, almost as if a religious icon of the person in the middle, who I believe appears to be being fingerprinted or something by the police. He's sort of glowing. There's literally almost a halo behind him on the wall where that advertisement
right,
is kind of echoing that golden tone. So his face is beautiful. It's beautifully lit. It's beautifully posed. It's almost kind of universal. And in some ways, it's almost like there's a single story that involves him that has nothing to do with anything else in the photo. It's almost as if he's alone and there's all this chaos around him. And even though he's literally participating in it because he is apparently in police custody, he's very removed from it at the same time.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how this man who's at the center of this and has that kind of ethereal look to the heavens, juxtaposes with the picture of the woman on the billboard. That may be just a completely commercial mural that we're looking at, but in some way with the cap, it also makes me think about, how much China is trying to impose this, what they call the socialist market economy. So you have almost like a kind of ideological commentary by the person's face, like they're not having anything of it, and almost like looking to something where there's a way out, or maybe a different kind of ideal.
Yeah, and with those other figures on whatever this billboard is, or again, it's kind of happy worker poses versus this reality of all of this complicated relationship between citizen and state in the foreground.
Yeah, it's like capitalist propaganda or something, and then this is the real deal.
Yeah. The other thing, too, that hit me, just the way this photo is populated with all of these different stories, as you said, is one of the stories for me is in these sorts of situations, there's always cameras, cops, and phones, and this is a good example. You've got police, you've got a camera, you've got people with phones in the background. That, again, that universe of public space is always already being recorded. So this last image from the Hong Kong protest, we're featuring in our segment that we call the pick. And here we're interested in what makes a photo a good editorial choice among lots of options.
This photograph was taken by Yin Chan. It shows members of the Hong Kong press that are showing up at a police press conference, and they're wearing protective clothing and helmets, as you can see. And the press conference was specifically to address police brutality.
People online were referring to this as epic trolling, and it really is, but toward a particular point, right? Which is they're not really saying this is fun and games. They're bringing kind of their outdoor combat photography gear, if you will, indoors to this very state-sponsored setting of this press conference, and to make this larger point. And so you get this sense of we are participating. It puts the viewer essentially in the position of the members of the media as opposed to siding with the state visually.
Exactly. What's really fascinating is how much this photograph in multiple ways is using like soft power or latent power to like speak truth to power and to protest. And to the extent that the apparel, the headgear and the yellow vests, which are also like completely code to the yellow vest movement in France right now, where that's also their population is saying, hey, things are not right. And so they're sending this message. We're doing our job. It's a press conference, but it's not a press conference at all. This is like a massive statement that something's wrong, that we're under arrest, we're basically getting pilloried. Then the way the setup of this photograph, where it looks like the three police officials look like they're defendants in a trial or something, like they're in some kind of a defendant's box.
Yeah. And again, it's that sense of, that line, the blue line, we might even say, of space where they're sitting that's dividing them from the media and other people gathered really kind of reinforces that. Yeah. And more broadly too, Michael, one of the things that this photograph made me think about is the dangers that a lot of journalists, particularly photojournalists, face when they're covering conflict of all kinds around the world. And this might seem kind of like a pointed / funny way to really speak out about the specific treatment of journalists and photojournalists in Hong Kong. But it also speaks to me to this broader concern that photojournalists always have to have about their own safety and who really is going to protect them. So we will see you all next time. Thanks for joining us.